You are listening to All About Love, authored by Bell Hooks and narrated to you by Audiobooks with Keeper of Lost Stories. Kindly subscribe for more such audiobooks. Introduction. Grace, touched by love. It is possible to speak with our heart directly. Most ancient cultures know this. We can actually converse with our heart as if it were a good friend. In modern life, we have become so busy with our daily affairs and thoughts that we have lost this essential art of taking time to converse with our heart. Jack Cornfield. On my kitchen wall hang four snapshots of graffiti art I first saw on construction walls as I walked to my teaching job at Yale University years ago. The declaration, "The search for love continues, even in the face of great odds," was painted in bright colors. At the time, recently separated from a partner of almost 15 years, I was often overwhelmed by grief so profound it seemed as though an immense sea of pain was washing my heart and soul away. Overcome by sensations of being pulled underwater, drowning, I was constantly searching for anchors to keep me afloat, to pull me back safely to the shore. The declaration on the construction walls, with its childlike drawing of unidentifiable animals, always lifted my spirits. Whenever I passed the site, the affirmation of love's possibility sprawling across the block gave me hope. Signed with the first name of local artist, these works spoke to my heart. Reading them, I felt certain the artist was undergoing a crisis in his life, either already confronting loss or facing the possibility of loss. In my head, I engaged in imaginary conversations about the meaning of love with him. I told him how his playful graffiti art anchored me and helped restore my faith in love. I talked about the way this declaration, with its promise of a love waiting to be found, a love I could still hope for, lifted me out of the abyss I had fallen into. My grief was a heavy, despairing sadness caused by parting from a companion of many years. But, more important, it was a despair rooted in the fear that love did not exist, could not be found, and even if it were lurking somewhere, I might never know it in my lifetime. It had become hard for me to continue to believe in love's promise when everywhere I turned, the enchantment of power or the terror of fear overshadowed the will to love. One day, on my way to work, looking forward to the day's meditation on love that the sight of the graffiti art endangered, I was stunned to find that the construction company had painted over the picture with a white paint so glaringly bright it was possible to see faint traces of the original art underneath. Upset that what had now become a ritual affirmation of love's grace was no longer there to welcome me, I told everyone of my disappointment. Finally, someone passed on the rumor that the graffiti art had been whitewashed because the words were a reference to individuals living with HIV and that the artist might be gay. Perhaps it is just as likely that the men who splashed paint on the wall were threatened by this public confession of a longing for love, a longing so intense it could not only be spoken but was deliberately searched for. After much searching, I located the artist and talked with him face to face about the meaning of love. We spoke about the way public art can be a vehicle for the sharing of life affirming thoughts. And we both expressed our grief and annoyance that the construction company had so callously covered up a powerful message about love. To remind me of the construction walls, he gave me snapshots of the graffiti art. From the time we met, everywhere I have lived, I have placed these snapshots above my kitchen sink. Every day when I drink water or take a dish from the cupboard, I stand before this reminder that we yearn for love, that we seek it, even when we lack hope that it really can be found. There are not many public discussions of love in our culture right now. At best, popular culture is the one domain in which our longing for love is talked about. Movies, music, magazines, and books are the place where we turn to hear our yearnings for love expressed. Yet, the talk is not the life affirming discourse of the 60s and 70s, which urged us to believe all you need is love. Nowadays, the most popular messages are those that declare the meaningless of love, its irrelevance. A glaring example of this cultural shift was the tremendous popularity of Tina Turner's song with the title boldly declaring, "What's love got to do with it?" I was saddened and appalled when I interviewed a well known female rapper, at least 20 years my junior, who, when asked about love, responded with biting sarcasm, "Love? What's that? I've never had any love in my life." Youth culture today is cynical about love, and that cynicism has come from their pervasive feeling that love cannot be found. Expressing this concern in When All You Have Ever Wanted Isn't Enough, Harold Kushner writes, "I'm afraid that we may be raising a generation of young people who will grow up afraid to love, afraid to give themselves completely to another person, because they will have seen how much it hurts to take the risk of loving and have it not work out. I'm afraid that they will grow up looking for intimacy without risk, for pleasure without significant emotional investment. They will be so fearful of the pain of disappointment that they will forego the possibilities of love and joy." Young people are cynical about love. Ultimately, cynicism is a great mask of the disappointed and betrayed heart. When I travel around the nation giving lectures about ending racism and sexism, audiences, especially young listeners, become agitated when I speak about the place of love in any movement for social justice. Indeed, all the great movements for social justice in our society have strongly emphasized a love ethic. Yet, young listeners remain reluctant to embrace the idea of love as a transformative force. To them, love is for the naive, the weak, the hopelessly romantic. Their attitude is mirrored in the grown ups they turn to for explanations. As spokesperson for a disillusioned generation, Elizabeth Woodsell asserts in Bitch, in praise of difficult women, "None of us are getting better at loving, we are getting more scared of it. We were not given good skills to begin with, and the choices we make have tended only to reinforce a sense that it is hopeless and useless." Her words echo all that I hear an older generation say about love. When I talked of love with my generation, I found it made everyone nervous or scared, especially when I spoke about not feeling loved enough. On several occasions, as I talked about love with friends, I was told I should consider seeing a therapist. I understand that a few friends were simply weary of my bringing up the topic of love and felt that if I saw a therapist, it would give them a break. But most folks were just frightened of what might be revealed in any exploration of the meaning of love in our lives. Yet, whenever a single woman over 40 brings up the topic of love, again and again the assumption rooted in sexist thinking is that she is desperate for a man. No one thinks she is simply passionately, intellectually interested in the subject matter. No one thinks she is rigorously engaged in a philosophical undertaking wherein she is endeavoring to understand the metaphysical meaning of love in everyday life. No, she is just seen as on the road to fatal attraction. Disappointment and a pervasive feeling of brokenheartedness led me to begin thinking more deeply about the meaning of love in our culture. My longing to find love did not make me lose my sense of reason or perspective. It gave me the incentive to think more, to talk about love, and to study popular and more serious writing on this subject. As I pored over non-fiction books on the subject of love, I was surprised to find that the vast majority of the revered books once used as reference works, and even those popular as self help books, have been written by men. All my life, I have thought of love as primarily a topic women contemplate with greater intensity and vigor than anybody else on the planet. I still hold this belief, even though visionary female thinking on the subject has yet to be taken as seriously as the thoughts and writings of men. Men theorize about love, but women are more often love's practitioners. Most men feel that they receive love and therefore know what it feels like to be loved. Women often feel we are in a constant state of yearning, wanting love but not receiving it. In philosopher Jacob Needleman's Primer, a little book about love, virtually all the major narratives of love he comments on are written by men. His list of significant references doesn't include books written by women. Throughout my graduate school training for a doctorate in literature, I can recall only one woman poet being extolled as a high priestess of love, Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She was, however, considered a minor poet. Yet, even the most non literary student among us knew the opening line of her most well known sonnet: How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. This was in pre feminist days. In the wake of the contemporary feminist movement, the Greek poet Sappho has now become enshrined as another love goddess. Back then, in every creative writing course, the poets dedicated to the love poem were always male. Indeed, the partner I left after many years first quoted me with a love poem. He had always been emotionally unavailable and not at all interested in love as either a topic for discussion or a daily life practice, but he was absolutely confident that he had something meaningful to say on the subject. I, on the other hand, thought all my grown up attempts to write love poems were mushy and pathetic. Words fail me when I try to write about love. My thoughts seemed sentimental, silly, and superficial. When writing poetry in my girlhood, I had felt the same confidence I could come to see in my adult life only in male writers. When I first began to write poetry in girlhood, I thought love was the only topic, the most important passion. Indeed, the first poem I published at age 12 was called A Look at Love. Somewhere along the way, in that passage from girlhood to womanhood, I learned females really had nothing serious to teach the world about love. Death became my chosen topic. No one around me, professors and students alike, doubted a woman's ability to be serious when it came to thinking and writing about death. All the poems in my first book were on the topic of death and dying. Even so, the poem that opened the book, The Woman's Mourning Song, was about the loss of a loved one and the refusal to let death destroy memory. Contemplating death has always been a subject that leads me back to love. Significantly, I began to think more about the meaning of love as I witnessed the death of many friends, comrades, and acquaintances, many of them dying young and unexpectedly. When I was approaching the age of 40 and facing the type of cancer scares that have become so commonplace in women's life, they are practically routine. My first thought as I waited for the test results was that I was not ready to die because I had not yet found the love my heart had been seeking. Shortly after this crisis ended, I had a grave illness that was life threatening. Confronting the possibility of dying, I became obsessed with the meaning of love in my life and in contemporary culture. My work as a cultural critic offered me a constant opportunity to pay close attention to everything the mass media, particularly movies and magazines, tell us about love. Mostly, they tell us that everyone wants love, but that we remain totally confused about the practice of love in everyday life. In popular culture, love is always the stuff of fantasy. Maybe this is why men have done most of the theorizing about love. Fantasy has primarily been their domain, both in the sphere of cultural production and in everyday life. Male fantasy is seen as something that can create reality, whereas female fantasy is regarded as pure escape. Hence, the romance novel remains the only domain in which women speak of love with any degree of authority. However, when men appropriate the romance genre, their work is far more rewarded than is writing of women. A book like The Bridges of Madison County is the supreme example. Had a woman penned this sentimental, shallow story of love, it is unlikely it would ever have become such a major mainstream success, crossing all boundaries of genre. Of course, consumers of books about love are primarily female, yet male sexism alone does not explain the lack of more books by and about love written by women. Apparently, women are both willing and eager to hear what men have to say about love. Female sexist thinking may lead a woman to feel she already knows what another woman will say. Such a reader may feel that she has more to gain by reading what men have to say. Earlier in my life, I read books about love and never thought about the gender of the writer. Eager to understand what we mean when we speak of love, I did not really consider the extent to which gender shaped a writer's perspective. It was only when I began to think seriously about the subject of love and to write about it that I pondered whether women do this differently from men. Reviewing the literature on love, I noticed how few writers, male or female, talk about the impact of patriarchy, the way in which male domination of women and children stands in the way of love. John Bradshaw's Creating Love, The Next Great Stage of Growth, is one of my favorite books on the topic. He valiantly attempts to establish the link between male domination and the lack of love of families. Famous for work that calls attention to the inner child, Bradshaw believes that the ending patriarchy is one step in the direction of love. However, his work on love has never received ongoing attention and celebration. It did not get the notice given work by men who write about love while affirming sexist defined gender roles. Profound changes in the way we think and act must take place if we are to create a loving culture. Men writing about love always testify that they have received love. They speak from this position. It gives what they say authority. Women, more often than not, speak from a position of lack, of not having received the love we long for. A woman who talks of love is still suspect. Perhaps this is because all that enlightened woman may have to say about love will stand as a direct threat and challenge to the visions men have offered us. I enjoy what male writers have to say about love. I cherish my Rumi and my Rilke, male poets who stir hearts with their words. Men often write about love through fantasy, through what they imagine is possible rather than what they concretely know. We know now that Rilke did not write as he lived, that so many words of love offered us by great men fail us when we come face to face with reality. And even though John Gray's work troubles me and makes me mad, I confess to reading and rereading Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. But like many women and men, I want to know about the meaning of love beyond the realm of fantasy, beyond what we imagine can happen. I want to know love's truths as we live them. Almost all the recent popular self help writing by men on love, from works like Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus to John Welwood's Love and Awakening, make use of feminist perspectives on gender roles. Ultimately, though, the authors remain wedded to belief systems, which suggests that there are basic inherent differences between women and men. In actuality, all the concrete proof indicates that while the perspectives of men and women often differ, these differences are learned characteristics, not innate or natural traits. If the notion that men and women were absolute opposites inhabiting totally different emotional universes were true, men would never have become the supreme authorities on love. Given gender stereotypes that assign to women the role of feelings and being emotional and to men the role of reason and non emotion, real men would shy away from any talk of love. Though considered the established authorities on the subject, only a few men talk freely, telling the world what they think about love. In everyday life, males and females alike are relatively silent about love. Our silence shields us from uncertainty. We want to know love. We are simply afraid the desire to know too much about love will lead us closer and closer to the abyss of lovelessness. While ours is a nation wherein the majority of citizens are followers of religious faiths that proclaim the transformative power of love, many people feel that they do not have a clue as to how to love. And practically everyone suffers a crisis of faith when it comes to realizing biblical theories about the art of loving in everyday life. It is far easier to talk about loss than it is to talk about love. It is easier to articulate the pain of love's absence than to describe its presence and meaning in our lives. Taught to believe that the mind, not the heart, is the seat of learning, many of us believe that to speak of love with any emotional intensity means we will be perceived as weak and irrational. And it is especially hard to speak of love when what we have to say calls attention to the fact that lovelessness is more common than love, that many of us are not sure what we mean when we talk of love or how to express love. Everyone wants to know more about love. We want to know what it means to love, what we can do in our everyday lives to love and be loved. We want to know how to seduce those among us who remain wedded to lovelessness and open the door to their hearts to let love enter. The strength of our desire does not change the power of our cultural uncertainty. Everywhere we learn the love is important, and yet we are bombarded by its failure. In the realm of the political, among the religious, in our families, and in our romantic lives, we see little indication that love informs decisions, strengthens our understanding of community, or keeps us together. This bleak picture in no way alters the nature of our longing. We still hope that love will prevail. We still believe in our love's promise. Just as the graffiti proclaimed, our hope lies in the reality that so many of us continue to believe in love's power. We believe it is important to know love. We believe it is important to search for love's truths. In an overwhelming number of private conversations and public dialogues, I have given and heard testimony about the mounting lovelessness in our culture and the fear it strikes in everyone's heart. This despair about love is coupled with a callous cynicism that frowns upon any suggestion that love is as important as work, as crucial to our survival as a nation as the drive to succeed. Awesomely, our nation, like no other in the world, is a culture driven by quest to love, even as it offers so little opportunity for us to understand love's meaning or to know how to realize love in word and deed. Our nation is equally driven by sexual obsession. There is no aspect of sexuality that is not studied, talked about, or demonstrated. How to classes exist for every dimension of sexuality. Yet, schools for love do not exist. Everyone assumes that we will know how to love instinctively. Despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, we still accept that family is the primary school for love. Those of us who do not learn how to love among family are expected to experience love in romantic relationships. However, this love often eludes us, and we spend a lifetime undoing the damage caused by cruelty, neglect, and all manner of lovelessness experienced in our families of origin and in relationships where we simply did not know what to do. Only love can heal the wounds of the past. However, the intensity of our woundedness often leads to a closing of the heart, making it impossible for us to give or receive the love that is given to us. To open our hearts more fully to love's power and grace, we must dare to acknowledge how little we know of love in both theory and practice. We must face the confusion and disappointment that much of what we were taught about the nature of love makes no sense when applied to daily life. Contemplating the practice of love in everyday life, thinking about how we love and what is needed for ours to become a culture where love's sacred presence can be felt everywhere. I wrote this meditation. As the title All About Love New Visions indicates, we want to live in a culture where love can flourish. We yearn to end the lovelessness that is so pervasive in our society. This book tells us how to return to love. All About Love New Visions provides radical new ways to think about the art of loving, offering a hopeful, joyous vision of love's transformative power. It lets us know that we must do to love again. Gathering love's wisdom, it lets us know what we must do to be touched by love's grace. 1. Clarity. Give love words. As a society, we are embarrassed by love. We treat it as if it were an obscenity. We reluctantly admit to it. Even saying the word makes us stumble and blush. Love is the most important thing in our lives, a passion for which we would fight or die, and yet we are reluctant to linger over its names. Without a supple vocabulary, we can't even talk or think about it directly. By Diane Ackerman. The men in my life have always been the folks who are wary of using the word love lightly. They are wary because they believe women make too much of love, and they know that what we think love means is not always what they believe it means. Our confusion about what we mean when we use the word love is the source of our difficulty in loving. If our society had a commonly held understanding of the meaning of love, the act of loving would not be so mystifying. Dictionary definitions of love tend to emphasize romantic love, defining love first and foremost as profoundly tender, passionate affection for another person, especially when based on sexual attraction. Of course, other definitions let the reader know how one may have such feelings with a context that is not sexual. However, deep affection does not really adequately describe love's meaning. The vast majority of books on the subject of love work hard to avoid giving clear definitions. In the introduction of Diane Ackerman's A Natural History of Love, she declares love is the great intangible. A few sentences down from this, she suggests everyone admits that love is wonderful and necessary, yet no one can agree on what it is. Coyly, she adds, we use the word love in such a sloppy way that it can mean almost nothing or absolutely everything. No definition ever appears in her book that would help anyone trying to learn the art of loving. Yet she is not alone in writing of love in ways that cloud our understanding. When the very meaning of the word is cloaked in mystery, it should not come as a surprise that most people find it hard to define what they mean when they use the word love. Imagine how much easier it would be for us to learn how to love if we began with a shared definition. The word love is most often defined as a noun, yet all the more astute theorists of love acknowledge that we would all love better if we used it as a verb. I spent years searching for a meaningful definition of the word love and was deeply relieved when I found one in psychiatrist M. Scott Peck's classic self help book, The Road Less Traveled, first published in 1978. Echoing the work of Erich Fromm, he defines love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Explaining further, he continues, love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love, we choose to love. Since the choice must be made to nurture growth, this definition counters the more widely accepted assumption that we love instinctually. Everyone who has witnessed the growth process of a child from the moment of birth on sees clearly that before language is known, before the identity of caretakers is recognized, babies respond to affectionate care. Usually, they respond with sounds or looks of pleasure. As they grow older, they respond to affectionate care by giving affection, cooing at the sight of a welcomed caretaker. Affection is only one ingredient of love. To truly love, we must learn to mix various ingredients care, affection, recognition, respect, commitment, and trust, as well as honest and open communication. Learning faulty definitions of love when we are quite young makes it difficult to be loving as we grow older. We start out committed to the right path but go in the wrong direction. Most of us learn early on to think of love as a feeling. When we feel deeply drawn to someone, we cataract with them. That is, we invest feelings or emotion in them. That process of investment wherein a loved one becomes important to us is called cathexis. In his book, Peck rightly emphasizes that most of us confuse cathecting with love. We all know how often individuals feel connected to someone through the process of cathecting insists that they love the other person even if they are hurting or neglecting them. Since their feeling is that of cathexis, they insist that what they feel is love. When we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful and abusive. Love and abuse cannot coexist. Abuse and neglect are, by definition, the opposites of nurturance and care. Often, we hear of a man who beats his children and wife and then goes to the corner bar and passionately proclaims how much he loves them. If you talk to the wife on a good day, she may also insist he loves her, despite his violence. An overwhelming majority of us come from dysfunctional families in which we were taught we are not okay, where we were shamed verbally and or physically abused and emotionally neglected even as we were also taught to believe that we were loved. For most folks, it is just too threatening to embrace a definition of love that would no longer enable us to see love as a present in our families. Too many of us need to cling to a notion of love that either makes abuse acceptable or at least makes it seem that whatever happened was not that bad. Raised in a family in which aggressive shaming and verbal humiliation coexisted with lots of affection and care, I had difficulty embracing the term dysfunctional. Since I felt and still feel attached to my parents and siblings, proud of all the positive dimensions of our family life, I did not want to describe us by using a term that implied our life together had been all negative or bad. I did not want my parents to think I was disparaging them. I was appreciative of all the good things that they had given in the family. With therapeutic help, I was able to see the term dysfunctional as a useful description and not as an absolute negative judgment. My family of origin provided throughout my childhood a dysfunctional setting and it remains one. This does not mean that it is not also a setting in which affection, delight, and care are present. On any day in the family of origin, I might have been given caring attention wherein my being a smart girl was affirmed and encouraged. Then, hours later, I would be told that it was precisely because I thought I was so smart that I was likely to go crazy and be put in a mental institution where no one would visit me. Not surprisingly, this odd mixture of care and unkindness did not positively nurture the growth of my spirit. Applying Peck's definition of love to my childhood experience in my household of origin, I could not honestly describe it as loving. Pressed in therapy to describe my household of origin in terms of whether it was loving or not, I painfully admitted that I did not feel loved in our household, but that I did feel cared for. And outside my household of origin, I felt genuinely loved by individual family members like my grandfather. This experience of genuine love nurtured my wounded spirit and enabled me to survive acts of lovelessness. I'm grateful to have been raised in a family that was caring and strongly believed that had my parents been loved well by their parents, they would have given that love to their children. They gave what they had been given care. Remember, care is a dimension of love, but simply giving care does not mean we are loving. Like many adults who were verbally and or physically abused as children, I spent a lot of my life trying to deny the bad things that had happened, trying to cling only to the memory of good and delicious moments in which I had known care. In my case, the more successful I became, the more I wanted to cease speaking the truth about my childhood. Often, critics of self help literature and recovery programs like to make it seem that far too many of us are eager to embrace the belief that our families of origins were, are, or remain dysfunctional and lacking in love. But I found that, like myself, most people, whether raised in an excessively violent or abusive home or not, shy away from embracing any negative critique of our experiences. Usually, it requires some therapeutic intervention, whether through literature that teaches and enlightens us or therapy, before many of us can even begin to critically examine childhood experience and acknowledge the ways in which they have had an impact on our adult behavior. Most of us find it difficult to accept a definition of love that says we are never loved in a context where there is abuse. Most psychologically and or physically abused children have been taught by parenting adults that love can coexist with abuse. And in extreme cases, that abuse is an expression of love. This faulty thinking often shapes our adult perceptions of love. So that just as we would cling to the notion that those who hurt us as children loved us, we try to rationalize being hurt by other adults by insisting that they love us. In my case, many of the negative shaming practices I was subjected to in childhood continued in my romantic adult relationships. Initially, I did not want to accept a definition of love that would also compel me to face the possibility that I had not known love in the relationships that were most primary to me. Years of therapy and critical reflection enabled me to accept that there is no stigma attached to acknowledging a lack of love in one's primary relationships. And if one's goal is self recovery, to be well in one's soul, honestly and realistically, confronting lovelessness is a part of healing process. A lack of sustained love does not mean the absence of care, affection, or pleasure. In fact, my long term romantic relationships, like the ones in my family, have been so full of care that it would be quite easy to overlook the ongoing emotional dysfunction. In order to change the lovelessness in my primary relationships, I had to first learn anew the meaning of love and from there learn how to be loving. Embrace a definition of love that was clear was the first step in the process. Like many who read The Road Less Traveled again and again, I'm grateful to have been given a definition of love that helped me face the places in my life where love was lacking. I was in my mid 20s when I first learned to understand love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. It still took years for me to let go of learned patterns of behavior that negated my capacity to love and receive love. One pattern that made the practice of love especially difficult was my constantly choosing to be with men who were emotionally wounded, who were not that interested in being loving even though they desired to be loved. I wanted to know love, but I was afraid to surrender and trust another person. I was afraid to be intimate by choosing men who were not interested in being loving. I was able to practice giving love, but always within an unfulfilling context. Naturally, my need to receive love was not met. I got what I was accustomed to getting care and affection, usually mingled with a degree of unkindness, neglect, and on some occasions, outright cruelty. At times I was unkind. It took me a long time to recognize that while I wanted to know love, I was afraid to be truly intimate. Many of us choose relationships of affection and care that will never become loving because they feel safer. The demands are not as intense as loving requires. The risk is not as great. So many of us long for love but lack the courage to take risks. Even though we are obsessed with the idea of love, the truth is that most of us live relatively decent, somewhat satisfying lives, even if we often feel that love is lacking. In these relationships, we share genuine affection and or care. For most of us, that feels like enough because it is usually a lot more than we received in our families of origin. Undoubtedly, many of us are more comfortable with the notion that love can mean anything to anybody precisely because when we define it with precision and clarity, it brings us face to face with our lacks, with terrible alienation. The truth is, far too many people in our culture do not know what love is. And this not knowing feels like a terrible secret, a lack that we have to cover up. Had I been given a clear definition of love earlier in my life, it would not have taken me so long to become a more loving person. Had I shared with others a common understanding of what it means to love, it would have been easier to create love. It is particularly distressing that so many recent books on love continue to insist that definitions of love are unnecessary and meaningless. Or worse, the author suggests love should mean something different to men that it does to women. That the sexes should respect and adapt to our inability to communicate since we do not share respect and adapt to our inability to communicate the same language. This type of literature is popular because it does not demand a change in fixed ways of thinking about gender roles, culture, or love. Rather than sharing strategies that would help us become more loving, it actually encourages everyone to adapt to circumstances where love is lacking. Women, more so than men, rush out to purchase this literature. We do so because collectively we are concerned about lovelessness. Since many women believe they will never know fulfilling love, they are willing to settle for strategies that help ease the pain and increase the peace, pleasure, and playfulness in existing relationships, particularly romantic ones. No vehicle in our culture exists for readers to talk back to the writers of this literature. And we do not really know if it has been truly useful, if it promotes constructive change. The fact that women more than men buy self help books, using our consumer dollars to keep specific books on bestseller list, is no indication that these books actually help us transform our lives. I've bought tons of self help books. Only a very few of them have made a difference in my life. This is true for many readers. The lack of an ongoing public discussion and public policy about the practice of love in our culture and in our lives means that we still look to books as a primary source of guidance and direction. Large numbers of readers embrace Peck's definition of love and are applying it to their lives in ways that are helpful and transformative. We can spread the word by evoking this definition in day to day conversations, not just when we talk to other adults in our conversations with children and teenagers. When we intervene on mystifying assumptions that love cannot be defined by offering workable, useful definitions, we are already creating a context where love can begin to flourish. Some folks have difficulty with Peck's definition of love because he uses the word spiritual. He is referring to that dimension of our core reality where mind, body, and spirit are one. An individual does not need to be a believer in a religion to embrace the idea that there is an animating principle in the self, a life force, that when nurtured enhances our capacity to be more fully self actualized and able to engage in communion with the world around us. To begin by always thinking of love as an action rather than a feeling is one way in which anyone using the word in this manner automatically assumes accountability and responsibility. We are often taught that we have no control over our feelings, yet most of us accept that we choose our actions, that intention and will inform what we do. We also accept that our actions have consequences. To think of actions shaping feelings is one way we rid ourselves of conventionally accepted assumptions, such as that parents love their children or that one simply falls in love without exercising will or choice, that there are such things as crimes of passion. That is, he killed her because he loved her so much. If we were constantly remembering that love is as love does, we would not use the word in a manner that devalues and degrades its meaning. When we are loving, we openly and honestly express care, affection, responsibility, respect, commitment, and trust. Definitions are vital starting points for the imagination. What we cannot imagine cannot come into being. A good definition marks our starting point and lets us know where we want to end up. As we move toward our desired destination, we chart the journey, creating a map. We need a map to guide us on our journey to love, starting with the place where we know what we mean when we speak of love. Chapter 2, Justice, Childhood Love Lessons. Severe separations in early life leave emotional scars on the brain because they assault the essential human connection, the parent child bond, which teaches us that we are lovable, the bond which teaches us how to love. We cannot be whole human beings indeed. We may find it hard to be human without the sustenance of this first attachment. By Judith Yost. We learn about love in childhood. Whether our homes are happy or troubled, our family is functional or dysfunctional, it's the original school of love. I cannot remember ever wanting to ask my parents to define love. To my child's mind, love was the good feeling you got when family treated you like you mattered and you treated them like they mattered. Love was always and only about good feeling. In early adolescence, when we were whipped and told that these punishments were for our own good, or I am doing this because I love you, my siblings and I were confused. Why was harsh punishment a gesture of love? As children do, we pretend to accept this grown up logic, but we knew in our hearts it was not right. We knew it was a lie. Just like the lie the grown ups told when they explained after harsh punishment, it hurts me more than it hurts you. There is nothing that creates more confusion about love in the minds and hearts of children than unkind and or cruel punishment meted out by the grown-ups they have been taught they should love and respect. Such children learn early on to question the meaning of love, to yearn for love even as they doubt it exists. On the flip side, there are masses of children who grew on the confidence of love, that it is a good feeling, those who are never punished, who are allowed to believe that love is only about getting your needs met, your desires satisfied. In their child's mind, love is not about what they have to give, love is mostly something given to them. When children like these are overindulged, either materially or by allowed to act out, this is a form of neglect. These children, though not in any way abused or uncared for, are usually as unclear about love's meaning as their neglected and emotionally abandoned counterparts. Both groups have learned to think about love primarily in relation to good feelings, in the context of reward and punishment. From early childhood on, most of us remember being told we were loved when we did things pleasing to our parents. and we learn to give them affirmations of love when they pleased us. As children grow, they associate love more with acts of attention, affection, and caring. They still see parents who attempt to satisfy their desires as giving love. Children from all classes tell me that they love their parents and are loved by them, even those who are being hurt or abused. When asked to define love, small children pretty much agree that it's a good feeling, like when you have something to eat that you really like, especially if it's your favorite. They will say, my mommy loves me because she takes care of me and helps me do everything right. When asked how to love someone, they talk about giving hugs and kisses, being sweet and cuddly. The notion that love is about getting that what one wants, whether it's a hug or a new sweater or a trip to Disneyland, is a way of thinking about love that makes it difficult for children to acquire a deeper emotional understanding. We like to imagine that most children will be born into homes where they will be loved, but love will not be present if the grown ups who parent do not know how to love. Although lots of children are raised in homes where they are given some degree of care, love may not be sustained or even present. Adults across line of class, race, and gender indict the family. Their testimony conveys worlds of childhood where love was lacking, where chaos, neglect, abuse, and coercion reigned supreme. In a recent book, Raised in Captivity, Why Does America Fail Its Children? Lucia Hodgson documents the reality of lovelessness in the lives of a huge majority of children in US. Every day thousands of children in our culture are verbally and physically abused, starved, tortured, and murdered. They are the true victims of intimate terrorism in that they have no collective voice and no rights. They remain the property of parenting adults to do with as they will. There can be no love without justice. Until we live in a culture that not only respects but also upholds basic civil rights for children, most children will not know love. In our culture, the private family dwelling is the one institutionalized sphere of power that can easily be autocratic and fascistic. As absolute rulers, parents can usually decide without any intervention what is best for their children. If children's rights are taken away in any domestic household, they have no legal recourse. Unlike women who can organize to protest sexist domination, demanding both equal rights and justice, children can only rely on well meaning adults to assist them if they are being exploited and oppressed in the home. We all know that, irrespective of class or race, other adults rarely intervene to question or challenge what their peers are doing with their children. At a fun party, most of educated, well paid professionals, a multiracial, multi generational evening, the subject of disciplining kids by hitting was raised. Almost all the guests over 30 spoke about the necessity of using physical punishment. Many of us in the room had been smacked, whipped, or beaten as children. Men spoke the loudest in defense of physical punishment. Women, mostly mothers, talked about hitting as a last resort, but one they deployed when necessary. As one man bragged about the aggressive beatings he had received from his mother, sharing that they had been good for him, I interrupted and suggested that he might not be the misogynist woman hater he is today if he had not been brutally beaten up by women as a child. Although it is too simplistic to assume that just because we are hit as kids, we will grow up to be people who hit. I wanted the group to acknowledge that being physically hurt or abused by grown ups when we are children was harmful consequences in our adult life. A young professional, the mother of a small boy, bragged about the fact that she did not hit. That when her son misbehaved, she clamped down on his flesh, pinching him until he got the message. But this too is a form of coercive abuse. The other guests supported this young mother and her husband in their methods. I was astounded. I was a lone voice speaking out for the rights of children. Later, with other people, I suggested that had we all been listening to a man tell us that every time his wife or girlfriend does something he does not like, he just clamps down on her flesh, pinching her as hard as he can, everyone would have been appalled. They would have seen the action as coercive and abusive. Yet they could not acknowledge that it was wrong for an adult to hurt a child in this way. All the parents in that group claimed that they are loving. All the people in that room were college educated. Most called themselves good liberals, supportive of civil rights and feminism. But when it came to the rights of children, they had a different standard. One of the most important social myths we must debunk if we are to become a more loving culture is that the one that teaches parents that abuse and neglect can coexist with love. Abuse and neglect negate love. Care and affirmation, the opposite of abuse and humiliation, are the foundation of love. No one can rightfully claim to be loving when behaving abusively. Yet parents do this all the time in our culture. Children are told that they are loved even though they are being abused. It is a testimony to the failure of loving practice that abuse is happening in the first place. Many of the men who offer their personal testimony in Boyhood Growing Up Male tell stories of random violent abuse by parents that inflicted trauma. In his essay, When My Father Hit Me, Bob Shelby describes the pain of repeated beatings by his dad, stating, "From these experiences with my father, I learned about the abuse of power. By physically hitting my mother and me, he effectively stopped us from reacting to his humiliation of us. We cease to protest his violations of our boundaries and his ignoring our sense of being individuals with needs, demands, and rights of our own." Throughout his essay, Shelby expresses contradictory understandings about the meaning of love. On the one hand, he says, "I have no doubt that my father loved me, but his love became misdirected. He said he wanted to give me what he didn't have as a child." On the other hand, Shelby confesses, "What he most showed me, however, was his difficulty in being loved. All his life, he had struggled with feelings of being unloved." When Shelby describes his childhood, it is clear that his dad had affection for him and also gave him care some of the time. However, his dad did not know how to give and receive love. The affection he gave was undermined by the abuse. Writing from the space of adult recollection, Shelby talks about the impact of physical abuse on his boyhood psyche. As the intensity of the pain of his hits increased, I felt the hurt in my heart. I realized what hurt me the most were my feelings of love for this man who was hitting me. I covered my love with a dark cloth of hate. A similar story is told by other men in autobiographical narrative, men of all classes and races. One of the myths about lovelessness is that it exists only among the poor and deprived. Yet lovelessness is not a function of poverty or material lack. In homes where material privileges abound, children suffer emotional neglect and abuse. In order to cope with the pain of wounds inflicted in childhood, most of the men in boyhood sought some form of therapeutic care. To find their way back to love, they had to heal. Many men in our culture never recover from childhood unkindness. Studies show that males and females who are violently humiliated and abused repeatedly with no caring intervention are likely to be dysfunctional and will be predisposed to abuse others violently. In Jarvis J. Masters' book, Finding Freedom, Writing from Death Row, a chapter called Scars recounts his recognition that a vast majority of the scars covering the bodies of fellow inmates were not, as one might think, the result of violent adult interactions. These men were covered with scars from childhood beatings inflicted by parenting adults. Yet, he reports, none of them saw themselves as the victims of abuse. Throughout my many years of institutionalization, I, like so many of these men, unconsciously took refuge behind prison walls. Not until I read a series of books for adults who had been abused as children did I become committed to the process of examining my own childhood. Organizing the men for group discussion, Masters writes, I spoke to them of the pain I had carried through more than a dozen institutions, and I explained how all these events ultimately trapped me in a pattern of lashing out against everything. Like many abused children, male and female, these men were beaten by mothers, fathers, and other parental caregivers. When Master's mother dies, he feels grief that he cannot be with her. The other inmates do not understand this longing since she neglected and abused him. He responds, "She had neglected me, but am I to neglect myself as well by denying that I wished I had been with her when she died? That I still love her?" Even on death row, Master's heart remains open, and he can honestly confess to longing to give and receive love. Being hurt by parenting adults rarely alters a child's desire to love and be loved by them. Among grown ups who were wounded in childhood, the desire to be loved by uncaring parents persists, even when there is a clear acceptance of the reality that this love will never be forthcoming. Often, children will want to remain with parental caregivers who have hurt them because of their cathartic feelings for those adults. They will cling to the misguided assumptions that their parents love them even in the face of remembered abuse, usually by denying the abuse and focusing on random acts of care. In the prologue to Creating Love, John Bradshaw calls this confusion about love mystification. He shares, I was brought up to believe that love is rooted in blood relationships. You naturally loved anyone in your family. Love was not a choice. The love I learned about was bound by duty and obligation. My family taught me our culture's rules and beliefs about love. Even with the best intentions, our parents often confused love with what we now call abuse. To demystify the meaning of love, the art and practice of loving, we need to use sound definitions of love when talking with children. And we also need to ensure that loving action is never tainted with abuse. In a society like ours, where children are denied full civil rights, it is absolutely crucial that parenting adults learn how to offer loving discipline. Setting boundaries and teaching children how to set boundaries for themselves prior to misbehavior is an essential part of loving parenting. When parents start out disciplining children by using punishment, this becomes a pattern children respond to. Loving parents work hard to discipline without punishment. This does not mean that they never punish, only that when they do punish, they choose punishments like timeouts or the taking away of privileges. They focus on teaching children how to be self disciplining and how to take responsibility for their actions. Since the vast majority of us were raised in households where punishment was deemed the primary, if not the only way to teach discipline, the fact that discipline can be taught without punishment surprises many people. One of the simplest ways children learn discipline is by learning how to be orderly in daily life, to clean up any messes they make. Just teaching a child to take responsibility for placing toys in the appropriate place after playtime is one way to teach responsibility and self discipline. Learning to clean up the mess made during playtime helps a child learn to be responsible, and they can learn from their practical act how to cope with emotional mess. Were there current television shows that actually model loving parents, parents could learn these skills. Television shows oriented towards families often favorably represent children when they are overindulged, are disrespectful, or are acting out. Often they behave in a more adult manner than the parents. What we see on television today actually, at best, models for us inappropriate behavior and, in worst case scenarios, unloving behaviors. A great example of this is a movie like Home Alone, where celebration of disobedience and violence is done. But television can portray caring, loving family interaction. There are whole generations of adults who talk nostalgically about how they wanted their families to be the active portraits of family life portrayed on Leave It to Beaver or My Three Sons. We desired our families to be like those we saw on the screen because we were witnessing loving parenting, loving households, expressing to parents our desire to have families like the ones we saw on the screen. We were often told the families were not realistic. The reality was, however, that parents who come from unloving homes have never learned how to love and cannot create loving home environments or see them as realistic when watching them on television. The reality they are most familiar with and trust is the one they knew intimately. There was nothing utopian about the way problems were resolved on these shows. Parent and child discussion, critical reflection, and finding a way to make amends was usually the process by which misbehavior was addressed. On both shows, there was never just one parenting figure. Even though the mother was absent on My Three Sons, the lovable Uncle Charlie was a second parent. In a loving household where there are several parental caregivers, when a child feels one parent is being unjust, that child can appeal to another adult for mediation, understanding, or support. We live in a society where there are a growing number of single parents, female and male, but the individual parent can always choose a friend to be another parenting figure, however limited their interaction. This is why the categories of godmother and godfather are so crucial. When my best girlhood friend chose to have a child without a father in the household, I became the godmother, a second parenting figure. My friend's daughter turns to me to intervene if there is a misunderstanding or miscommunication between her and her mom. Here's one small example. My adult friend had never received an allowance as a child and did not feel she had the available extra money to offer an allowance to her daughter. She also believed her daughter would use all the money to buy sweets. Telling me that her daughter was angry with her over this issue, she opened up the space for us to have a dialogue. I shared my belief that allowances are important ways to teach children discipline, boundaries, and working through desires versus needs. I knew enough about my friend's finances to challenge her insistence that she could not afford to pay a small allowance, while simultaneously encouraging her not to project the wrongs of her childhood onto the present. As to whether the daughter would buy candy, I suggested she give the allowance with a statement of hope that it would not be used for overindulgence and see what happened. It all worked out just fine. Happy to have an allowance, the daughter chose to save her money to buy things she thought were really important, and candy was not on this list. Had there not been another adult parent figure involved, it might have taken these two a longer time to resolve their conflict. An unnecessary estrangement and wounding might have occurred. Significantly, love and respectful interaction between two adults exemplified for the daughter ways of problem solving. By revealing her unwillingness to accept criticism and her capacity to reflect on her behavior and change, the mother modeled for her daughter, without losing dignity or authority, the recognition that parents are not always right. Until we begin to see loving parenting in all walks of life in our culture, many people will continue to believe we can only teach discipline through punishment, and that harsh punishment is an acceptable way to relate to children. Because children can innately offer affection or respond to affectionate care by returning it, it is often assumed that they know how to love and therefore do not need to learn the art of loving. While the will to love is present in very young children, they still need guidance in the ways of love. Grown ups provide that guidance. Love is as love does, and it is our responsibility to give children love. When we love children, we acknowledge by our every action that they are not property, that they have rights, that we respect and uphold their rights. Without justice, there can be no love. 3. Honesty. Be true to love. When we reveal ourselves to our partner and find that this brings healing rather than harm, we make an important discovery that intimate relationship can provide a sanctuary from the world of facades, a sacred space where we can be ourselves, speaking our truth, sharing our inner struggles, and revealing our raw edges is sacred activity which allows two souls to meet and touch more deeply. By John Welwood. It is no accident that when we first learn about justice and fair play as children, it is usually in a context where the issue is one of telling the truth. The heart of justice is truth telling, seeing ourselves and the world the way it is rather than the way we want it to be. In recent years, sociologists and psychologists have documented the fact that we live in a nation where people are lying more and more each day. Philosopher Cicely Bock's book Lying: Moral Choice in Public and Private Life was among the first works to call attention to the grave extent to which lying has become accepted and commonplace in our daily interactions. M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled includes an entire section on lying. In The Dance of Deception, Harriet Lerner, another widely read psychotherapist, calls attention to the way in which women are encouraged by sexist socialization to pretend and manipulate, to lie as a way to please. Lerner outlines the various ways in which constant pretense and lying alienate women from their true feelings, how it leads to depression and loss of self awareness. Lies are told about the most insignificant aspects of daily life. When many of us are asked basic questions like, "How are you today?" a lie is substituted for the truth. Much of the lying people do in everyday life is done either to avoid conflict or to spare someone's feelings. Hence, if you are asked to come to dinner with someone whom you do not particularly like, you do not tell the truth or simply decline. You make up a story. You tell a lie. In such a situation, it should be appropriate to simply decline if stating one's reasons for declining might unnecessarily hurt someone. Lots of people learn how to lie in childhood. Usually, they begin to lie to avoid punishment or to avoid disappointing or hurting an adult. How many of us can vividly recall childhood moments where we courageously practiced the honesty we had been taught to value by our parents, only to find that they did not really mean for us to tell the truth all the time? In far too many cases, children are punished in circumstances where they respond with honesty to a question posed by an adult authority figure. It is impressed on their consciousness early on then that telling the truth will cause pain, and so they learn that lying is a way to avoid being hurt and hurting others. Lots of children are confused by the insistence that they simultaneously be honest and yet also learn how to practice convenient duplicity. As they mature, they begin to see how often grown ups lie. They begin to see what few people around them tell the truth. I was raised in a world where children were taught to tell the truth, but it did not take long for us to figure out that adults did not practice what they preached. Among my siblings, those who learned how to tell polite lies or say what grown ups wanted to hear were always more popular and more rewarded than those of us who told the truth. Among any group of kids, it is never clear why some quickly learn the fine art of dissimulation, while others find it hard to mask true feeling. Since pretense is such an expected aspect of childhood play, it is a perfect context for mastering the art of dissimulation. Concealing the truth is often a fun part of childhood play, yet when it becomes a common practice, it is a dangerous prelude to lying all the time. Sometimes children are fascinated by lying because they see the power it gives them over adults. Imagine a little girl goes to school and tells her teacher she is adopted, knowing all the while that that is not true. She revels in the attention received, both the sympathy and the understanding offered, as well as the frustration and anger of her parents when the teacher calls to talk about this newly discovered information. A friend of mine who lies a lot tells me she loves fooling people and making them act on knowledge that only she knows is untrue. She is 10 years old. When I was her age, I was frightened by lies. They confused me and they created confusion. Other kids poked fun at me because I was not good at lying. In the one truly violent episode between my mother and father, he accused her of lying to him. Then there was the night an older sister lied and said she was babysitting when she was actually out on a date. As he hit her, our father kept yelling, "Don't you lie to me," while the violence of his response created in us a terror of the consequences of lying. It did not alter the reality that we knew he did not always tell the truth. His favorite way of lying was withholding. His motto was just remain silent when asked questions, then you will not get caught in a lie. The men I have loved have always lied to avoid confrontation or take responsibility for inappropriate behavior. In Dorothy Dinnerstein's groundbreaking book, The Mermaid and the Minotaur: Sexual Arrangements and Human Malaise, she shares the insight that when a little boy learns that his powerful mother, who controls his life, really has no power within a patriarchy, it confuses him and causes rage. Lying becomes one of the strategic ways he can act out and render his mother powerless. Lying enables him to manipulate the mother even as he exposes her lack of power. This makes him feel more powerful. Males learn to lie as a way of obtaining power, and females not only do the same, but they also lie to pretend powerlessness. In her work, Harriet Lerner talks about the way in which patriarchy upholds deception, encouraging women to present a false self to men, and vice versa. In Dory Hollander's 101 Lies Men Tell Women, she confirms that while both women and men lie, her data and the findings of other researchers indicate that men tend to lie more and with more devastating consequences. For many young males, the earliest experience of power over others comes from the thrill of lying to more powerful adults and getting away with it. Lots of men shared with me that it was difficult for them to tell the truth if they saw what it would hurt a loved one. Significantly, the lying many boys learn to do to avoid hurting mom or whoever becomes so habitual that it becomes hard for them to distinguish a lie from the truth. This behavior carries over into adulthood. Often, men who would never think of lying in the workplace lie constantly in intimate relationships. This seems to be especially the case for heterosexual men who see women as gullible. Many women confess, and men as well, that they lie because they can get away with it. Their lies are forgiven. To understand why male lying is more accepted in our lives, we have to understand that the way in which power and privilege are accorded men simply because they are males within a patriarchal culture. The very concept of being man and a real man has always implied that when necessary, men can take action that breaks the rules, that is above the law. Patriarchy tells us daily through movies, television, and magazines that men of power can do whatever they want, that it's the freedom of them that makes men. The message given males is that to be honest is to be soft. The ability to be dishonest and indifferent to the consequences make a male hard, separates the men from the boys. John Stoltenberg's The End of Manhood, a book for men of conscience, analyzes the extent to which the masculine identity offered men as the ideal in patriarchal culture is one that requires all males to invent and invest in a false self. From the moment little boys are taught they should not cry or express hurt, feelings of loneliness or pain, that they must be tough, they are learning how to mask true feelings. In worst case scenarios, they are learning how to not feel anything ever. These lessons are usually taught to males by other males in sexist mothers. Even boys raised in most progressive, loving households where parents encourage them to express emotions learn a different understanding about masculinity and feelings on the playground, in the classroom, playing sports, or watching television. They may end up choosing patriarchal masculinity to be accepted by other boys and affirmed by male authority figures. In his important work, Rediscovering Masculinity, Victor Sadler stresses when we learn to use language as boys, we very quickly learn how to conceal ourselves through language. We learn to master language so that we can control the world around us. Even though we learn to blame others for our unhappiness and misery in relationships, we also know at some unspoken level how our masculinity has been limited and injured as we touch the hurt and pain of realizing how little we seem to feel about anything. Estrangement from feelings make it easier for men to lie because they are often in a trance state, utilizing survival strategies of asserting manhood that they learned as boys. This inability to connect with others carries with it an inability to assume responsibility for causing pain. This denial is most evident in cases where men seek to justify extreme violence toward those less powerful, usually women, by suggesting they are the ones who are really victimized by females. Regardless of the intensity of the male masquerade, inwardly many men see themselves as the victims of lovelessness. Like everyone, they learned as children to believe that love would be present in their lives. Although so many boys are taught to behave as though love does not matter, in their hearts they mean and yearn for it. That yearning does not go away simply because they become men. Lying as one form of acting out is a way that articulate ongoing rage at failure of love's promise. To embrace patriarchy, they must actively surrender the longing to love. Patriarchal masculinity requires of boys and men not only that they see themselves as more powerful and superior to women, but that they do whatever it takes to maintain their controlling position. This is one of the reasons men, more so than women, use lying as a means of gaining power in relationships. A commonly accepted assumption in a patriarchal culture is that love can be present in a situation where one group of individual dominates another. Many people believe men can dominate women and children yet still be loving. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung insightfully emphasized the truism that where the will to power is paramount, love will be lacking. Talk to any group of women about their relationships with men, no matter their race or class, and you will hear stories about the will to power, about the way men use lying, and that includes withholding information as a way to control and subordinate. It is no accident that greater cultural acceptance of lying in this society coincided with women gaining greater social equality. Early on in the feminist movement, women insisted that men had the upper hand because they usually control the finances. Now that women's earning power has greatly increased and women are more economically independent, men who want to maintain dominance must deploy subtle strategies to colonize and disempower them. Even the wealthiest professional woman can be brought down by being in a relationship where she longs to be loved and is consistently lied to the degree that she trusts her male companion, lying and other forms of betrayal will most likely shatter her self confidence and self esteem. Allegiance to male domination requires of men who embrace this thinking that they maintain dominance over women by any means necessary. While much cultural attention is given to domestic violence, and practically everyone agrees it is wrong for men to hit women as a way of subordinating us, most men use psychological terrorism as a way to subordinate women. This is a socially acceptable form of coercion, and lying is one of the most powerful weapons in this arsenal. When men lie to women, presenting a false self, the terrible price they pay to maintain power over us is the loss of their capacity to give and receive love. Trust is the foundation of intimacy. When lies erode trust, genuine connection cannot take place. While men who dominate others can and do express and experience ongoing care, they place a barrier between themselves and the experience of love. All visionary male thinkers challenging male domination insist that men can return to love only by repudiating the will to dominate. In The End of Manhood, Stoltenberg continually emphasizes that men can honor their own selfhood only through loving justice. He asserts justice between people is perhaps the most important connection people can have. Loving justice for themselves and others enables men to break the chokehold of patriarchal masculinity. In the chapter titled How We Can Have Better Relationships with the Women in Our Lives, Stoltenberg writes, loving justice between a man and a woman does not stand a chance when other men's manhood matters more. When a man has decided to love manhood more than justice, there are predictable consequences in all his relationships with women. Learning to live as a man of conscience, meaning deciding that your loyalty to the people whom you love is always more important than whatever lingering loyalty you may sometimes feel to other men's judgment on your manhood. When men and women are loyal to ourselves and others, when we love justice, we understand fully the myriad ways in which lying diminishes and erodes the possibility of meaningful, caring connection, that it stands in the way of love. Since the value and behavior of men are usually the standards by which everyone in our culture determines what is acceptable, it is important to understand that condoning lying is an essential component of patriarchal thinking for everyone. Men are by no means the only group who use lies as a way of gaining power over others. Indeed, if patriarchal masculinity estranges men from their selfhood, it is equally true that women who embrace patriarchal femininity, the insistence that females should act as though they are weak, incapable of rational thought, dumb, silly, are also socialized to wear a mask, to lie. This one of the primary themes is Lerner's The Dance of Deception. With shrewd insight, she calls women to account for our participation in structures of pretense and lies, particularly within family life. Women are often comfortable lying to men in order to manipulate them to give us things we feel we want or deserve. We may lie to bolster a male's self esteem. These lies may take the form of pretending to feel emotions we do not feel to pretending levels of emotional vulnerability and neediness that are false. Heterosexual women are often schooled by other women in the art of lying to men as a way to manipulate. Many examples of the support females receive for lying concern the desire to mate and bear children. When I longed to have a baby and my male partner at the time was not ready, I was stunned by the number of women who encouraged me to disregard his feelings, to go ahead without telling him. They felt it was fine to deny a child the right to be desired by both female and male biological parents. It disturbed me that women I respected did not take the need for male parenting seriously or believe that it was as important for a man to want to parent as a woman. Whether we like it or not, we still live in a world where children want to know who their fathers are and when they can go in search of absent fathers. I could not imagine bringing a child into this world whose father might reject him or her because he did not desire a child in the first place. Growing up in the 50s and the days before adequate birth control, every female was acutely conscious of the way unwanted pregnancies could alter the course of a young woman's life. Still, it was clear that there were girls who hoped for pregnancy to emotionally bind individual males to them forever. I thought those days were long gone, yet, even in this era of social equality between the sexes, I hear stories of females choosing to get pregnant when a relationship is rocky as a way of forcing the male to remain in their life or in the hope of forcing marriage. More than we might think, some men feel extremely bound to a woman when she gives birth to a child when they have fathered. The fact that men succumb to being lied to and manipulated when the issue is biological parenting does not make it right or just. Men who accept being lied to and manipulated are not only abdicating their power, they are setting up a situation where they can blame women or justify women hating. This is another case where lying is used to gain power over someone, to hold them against their will. Harriet Lerner reminds readers that honesty is only one aspect of truth telling, that it is equated with moral excellence and absence of deception or fraud. The mask of patriarchal femininity often renders women's deceptions acceptable. However, that women lie, we lend credence to age old sexist stereotypes that suggest women are inherently, by virtue of being female, less capable of truth telling. The origins of this sexist stereotype extend back to ancient stories of Adam and Eve, of Eve's willingness to lie, even to God. Often, when information is withheld by women and men, protection of privacy is the justification. In our culture, privacy is often confused with secrecy. Open, honest, truth telling individuals value privacy. We all need spaces where we can be alone with thoughts and feelings, where we can experience healthy psychological autonomy and can choose to share when we want to. Keeping secrets is usually about power, about hiding and concealing information. Hence, many recovery programs stress that you are only as sick as your secrets. When a former boyfriend's sister shared with me a careful guarded family secret regarding incest, which he did not know about, I responded by requesting that she tell him. If she didn't, I would. I felt that keeping this information a secret from him would violate the commitment we had made as a couple to be open and honest with each other. By withholding this information from him, joining his mother and sisters, I would have been participating in family dysfunction. Sharing with him affirmed my loyalty and respect for his capacity to cope with reality. While privacy strengthens all our bonds, secrecy weakens and damages connection. Lerner points out that we do not usually know the emotional cost of keeping a secret until the truth is disclosed. Usually, secrecy involves lying, and lying is always the setting for potential betrayal and violation of trust. Widespread cultural acceptance of lying is a primary reason many of us will never know love. It is impossible to nurture one's own or another's spiritual growth when the core of one's being and identity is shrouded in secrecy and lies. Trusting that another person always intends your good, having a core foundation of loving practice, cannot exist within a context of deception. It is this truism that makes all acts of judicious withholding major moral dilemmas. More than ever before, we as a society need to renew a commitment to truth telling. Such a commitment is difficult when lying is deemed more acceptable than telling the truth. Lying has become so much the accepted norm that people lie even when it would be simpler to tell the truth. Practically, every mental health care practitioner, from the most erudite psychoanalyst to untrained self help gurus, tell us that it is infinitely more fulfilling and we are all saner if we tell the truth. Yet most of us are not rushing to stand up and be counted among the truth tellers. Indeed, as someone committed to being honest in daily life, I experience the constant drag of being seen as a freak for telling the truth, even when I speak truthfully about simple matters. If a friend gives me a gift and asks me to tell him or her whether or not I will like it, I will respond honestly and judicially, that is to say, I will speak the truth in a positive, caring manner. Yet, even in this situation, the person who asks for honesty will often express annoyance when given a truthful response. In today's world, we are taught to fear the truth, to believe it always hurts. We are encouraged to see honest people as naive, as potential losers, bombarded with cultural propaganda ready to instill in all of us the notion that lies are more important, that truth does not matter. We are all potential victims. Consumer culture, in particular, encourages lies. Advertising is one of the cultural mediums that has most sanctioned lying, keeping people in a constant state of lack and perceptual desire strengthens the marketplace economy. Lovelessness is a boon to consumerism, and lies strengthen the world of predatory advertising. Our passive acceptance of lies in public life, particularly via the mass media, upholds and perpetuates lying in our private lives. In our public life, there would be nothing for tabloid journalism to expose if we lived our lives out in the open, committed to truth telling. Commitment to knowing love can protect us by keeping us wedded to a life of truth, willing to share ourselves openly and fully in both private and public life. To know love, we have to tell the truth to ourselves and to others. Creating a false self of mask fears and insecurities has become a common that many of us forget who we are and what we feel underneath the pretense. Breaking through this denial is always the first step in uncovering our longing to be honest and clear. Lies and secrets burden us and cause stress. When an individual has always lied, he has no awareness that the truth telling can take away this heavy burden. To know this, he must let the lies go. When feminism first began, women talked openly about our desires to know men better, to love them for who they really are. We talked about our desires to be loved for who we really are. And we urged men to be true to themselves, to express themselves. Then, when women and men began to share their thoughts and feelings, some women could not cope. They wanted their own lies and pretenses to be back in place. In the 70s, a popular Sylvia greeting card showed a woman seated in front of a fortune teller, gazing into a crystal ball. The caption on the front of the card read, "He never talks about his feelings." On the inside, the response was, "Next year at 2 p.m., men will start talking about their feelings, and at 2:05, women all over America will be sorry." When we hear another person's thoughts, beliefs, and feelings, it is more difficult to project onto them our perceptions of who they are. It is harder to be manipulative. At times, women find it difficult to hear what men have to say when what they tell us does not conform to our fantasies of who they are or who we want them to be. The wounded child inside many males is a boy who, when he first spoke his truths, was silenced by paternal sadism, by a patriarchal society that did not want him to claim his true feelings. The wounded child inside many females is a girl who was taught from early childhood on that she must become something other than herself, deny her true feelings in order to attract and please others. When men and women punish each other for truth telling, we reinforce the notion that lies are better. To be loving, we willingly hear each other's truth, and most important, we affirm the value of truth telling. Lies may make people feel better, but they do not help them know love.